Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back through the misty highlands of 9th century Ethiopia to talk about a tiny red fruit and how it spent 300 years turning the world into a collective of caffeinated enthusiasts. You might think you know coffee, but if you were dropped into the middle of the kaffa forests a millennium ago, you'd probably struggle to survive, not because of the lions, but because you'd likely die of sheer impatience, waiting for a single cup to brew. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments which city you retuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I love imagining where in the world you are while you re-listening to these dusty old stories. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let us ease into tonight. Imagine you are standing in the southwest of Ethiopia. The ground beneath your sandals is damp, dark, and incredibly rich. The air smells like a confusing mixture of ancient moss, wild jasmine, and the distant hint of wood smoke. You aren't alone. Beside you is a young man named Kaldi. He is a goat herder. And right now, he looks like he's having a minor existential crisis. He is staring at his goats, and frankly, so are you. Usually, goats are the masters of being boring. They chew, they stare, they occasionally headbutt a rock. But these goats are dancing. They are leaping, spinning, and participating in what looks like a very uncoordinated mountain rave. You follow Kaldi as he edges closer to the source of this sudden burst of caprine energy. It's a thicket of wild shrubs with glossy, dark green leaves and clusters of bright red berries that look a bit like cherries. Kaldi, being a curious soul, decides that if it's good enough for the goats, it's worth a try. He picks a handful. This is the moment where human history changes forever. Though at the time, it just looks like a guy eating weird fruit in the woods. As you watch him chew, you might expect him to suddenly start sprinting up the mountain. Instead, it's a slow realization. The fruit part is actually quite sweet, but the bean inside is a bit of a literal toothbreaker. Historians still debate this issue today. Was Kaldi actually a real person? Or is he a charming myth invented later to give coffee a picturesque origin story? Regardless of the academic bickering, the feeling you get as you mimic Kaldi and taste the berry is undeniable. It's a subtle buzz, a slight sharpening of the forest sounds, as if the volume of the world has been turned up just one notch. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. The people of this era didn't start by roasting and brewing these beans. No, they treated coffee like a snack. They would take the whole berries, perhaps ferment it a little, and just chew them for a boost of energy during long walks. It was effectively the world's first organic energy chew, long before people in neon spandex started selling them at marathons. You walk with Kaldi as he decides to take these magic berries to a nearby monastery. He's convinced he's found a gift from the heavens. You, meanwhile, are just trying to keep up with his suddenly brisk pace. The sun is beginning to dip behind the peaks of the Simeon Mountains, casting long purple shadows across the valley. The rhythm of your footsteps on the trail is steady. Crunch, crackle, crunch. It's a meditative sound. A reminder that in this part of the world, in this century, nothing happens quickly. Even a revolution in a cup takes its sweet, slow time. You follow Kaldi as he approaches the heavy, wooden gates of a mountain monastery, smelling of incense and centuries of quiet devotion. Kaldi is clutching a pouch of those vibrant red berries, his eyes still bright with the excitement of his discovery. You watch from the shadows as he presents them to an elder monk, a man whose face looks like a crumpled map of the Ethiopian highlands. The monk's reaction, however, isn't one of joy. He looks at the berries, then at Chaldee's twitchy energy, and lets out a sigh of profound disappointment. To him, anything that causes such a restless spirit must surely be a distraction from the divine. In a moment of stern judgment, the monk grabs the pouch and tosses the berries into a nearby charcoal brazier. You stand there, feeling a bit sorry for Goldie, but then something magical happens. As the berries begin to burn, the seeds inside start to pop and crackle. A scent begins to waft through the stone corridors. A deep, chocolatey, toasted aroma that is so divine it seems to contradict the monk's initial fears. It as the smell of the world, as first accidental roast. The other monks, drawn by this irresistible new fragrance, begin to peek out from their cells. They realize that no evil thing could possibly smell this comforting. They quickly rake the blackened seeds from the cooling embers, crush them with a stone, and drop them into a pot of boiling water. This leads us to a point that historians still debate today. Was it really the monks who first brewed the liquid, or did they simply follow the existing traditions of local nomadic tribes who had been using the plant for generations? Regardless of the academic tug of war, you are witnessing the birth of the beverage itself. You watch as the liquid turns a deep, murky brown. It's not the filtered, clear brew you see in modern glass carafes. It's thick, gritty, and smells like wood smoke and earth. Here's a quirky bit of trivia for you. The monks didn't just drink this for the taste. They discovered that this bitter broth was the ultimate weapon against the one thing every monk feared: falling asleep during the vigils, the long prayers that took place in the dead of night. Before coffee, a tired monk might find his chin hitting his chest mid-psalm. After coffee, they were wide awake, staring at the icons with an intensity that probably scared the local birds. They began to call it a gift from God, a tool to keep the spirit alert while the body wanted to succumb to the darkness. The air is thick with the steam from the clay pots. You take a sip from a small, handleless cup, and the bitterness hits you first, followed by a strange floral aftertaste that lingers on your tongue. It's a slow experience. No one is grabbing a coffee to go in the monastery. Time is measured by the sun and the shadows, and this drink fits perfectly into that rhythm. You watch the monks pass the pot around, their movements slow and deliberate, their voices hushed. It's interesting to think that these men, who lived lives of extreme simplicity and silence, were the first to master the art of the coffee break. But for them, it was a break from work. It was a way to deepen their focus. You feel the warmth of the cup in your hands and the heavy silence of the mountain night outside. There is a certain irony in it, the very substance that would eventually fuel the frantic, high-speed chatter of 21st century stock markets began its life as a companion to silence and prayer. As you sit there, the flickering candlelight makes the shadows dance on the stone walls, and you feel your own heart rate settle into a steady, calm beat. The world outside is vast and wild, but here, in the glow of the embers, everything feels centered around a single, steaming pot. You are learning the first rule of Ethiopian coffee. It is never just a drink. It is an invitation to stay exactly where you are. You leave the quiet stone walls of the monastery behind and begin to trek further into the heart of the Oromo territory. The landscape here is a tapestry of high plateaus and deep green valleys. You are walking alongside a group of Oromo warriors and travelers who are preparing for a long journey across the rugged terrain. You notice they aren't carrying heavy sacks of grain or complex cooking gear. Instead, they are preparing something that looks a bit like small, dark marbles. You watch curiously as they take crushed, sun-dried coffee berries and mix them with animal fat, usually clarified butter or goat tallow, rolling them into compact, portable spheres. This is the world's first energy bar, long before anyone put them in shiny plastic wrappers or sold them in gyms. You take one of these coffee balls from a traveler who offers it with a friendly nod. It's heavy, slightly greasy to the touch, and smells intensely earthy. When you take a bite, the texture is dense and chewy, a concentrated burst of caffeine and calories. It's not exactly a gourmet dessert, but you can feel the immediate, steady release of energy as you continue your walk. These early travelers knew that coffee was just a luxury. It was a survival tool, a way to keep the body moving when the path was steep and the sun was unforgiving. Historians still debate this issue today. Some scholars argue that the Gala and Oromo people were using coffee in this solid form centuries before it was ever brewed as a liquid. They suggest that the drinkable version was actually a much later adaptation. As you chew on your prehistoric caffeine snack, you realize that for these people, coffee was an essential part of their physical endurance, a companion for those who lived on the move. You feel a strange sense of connection to these ancient travelers, realizing that while our technology has changed, our basic human need for a little pick-me-up to get through a long day has remained remarkably constant. Here's a quirky bit of trivia for you. In some Oromo traditions, these coffee balls weren't just food. They were also used in rituals and as a form of currency during small trades. You watch as a traveler exchanges a handful of these spheres. The pace of life here is governed by the speed of your own legs, and there is something deeply satisfying about the simplicity of it. There are no deadlines, no notifications, just the rhythm of the trail and the slow, steady hum of energy from the coffee and fat mixture. As the sun reaches its zenith, the group stops to rest under the shade of a massive acacia tree. You lean your back against the rough bark and watch the heat shimmers dance over the distant horizon. One of the men begins to hum a low, repetitive tune, a song that has likely been passed down through generations of travelers. The sound blends with the rustle of the dry grass and the distant call of a bird. You find yourself sinking into a state of relaxed alertness. Your body is resting, but your mind is sharp, fueled by the ancient energy bar. Coffee was a secret shared by the mountains and the people who roamed them. It hadn't yet become a global commodity. It was a local mystery, a source of strength for the weary and a source of focus for the spiritual. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the day and the steady beat of the Oromo song wash over you. There is no rush to reach the next village. The journey is the destination, and as long as you have a few of those dark, greasy coffee balls in your pouch, you feel like you could walk forever. You breathe in the scent of the dry earth and the faint, lingering aroma of the coffee, feeling perfectly at home in a time that moves as slowly as the shadows across the plateau. You are standing in a small village on the edge of the forest. The wild, tangled growth of the highlands is still visible just a few hundred yards away. But here, the landscape feels a bit more intentional. You notice that the people aren't just trekking into the deep woods to find their caffeine fix anymore. Instead, they brought the forest to them. Small leafy shrubs with those familiar glossy leaves are now growing in the shaded patches right next to the thatched roof huts. You are witnessing the very first backyard gardens of the coffee world. This transition from wild foraging to domestic cultivation is a quiet revolution, one that happened so slowly that the people living through it probably didn't even realize they were changing the course of history. You watch an elderly woman as she tends to a young coffee tree. Rhythmic slowness, clearing away a few weeds, and ensuring the plant is shielded from the harshest midday sun by the canopy of a larger enset tree. The false banana that is a staple of the Ethiopian diet. This symbiotic relationship between coffee and shade is something the locals figured out long before modern agronomists wrote papers on it. They understood that coffee likes a bit of mystery and a lot of protection. You lean against the smooth trunk of a nearby tree and watch the sunlight filter through the broad leaves. creating a dappled pattern on the red earth. Historians still debate this issue today. Some argue that coffee was domesticated much earlier than the written records suggest, while others believe it remained a wild secret of the deep forest until at least the 15th century. But as you watch the village children playing near the saplings, it's clear that the plant has already become a part of the family. It is no longer a strange berry from the dancing goat mountain. It is a household asset, something to be nurtured, protected, and eventually celebrated. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. In these early days of domestic planting, coffee trees were often considered a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. Some communities believed that planting a coffee tree near your home would bring peace to the household, acts as a sort of botanical guardian. You see a small charm hanging from one of the branches, a simple piece of braided grass, and you realize that for these people, agriculture wasn't just about food security. It was about harmony. The pace of life in this village is dictated by the growth of these plants. You can rush a coffee tree. It takes years before it produces its first real harvest. And that forced patience seems to have seeped into the very bones of the people here. No one is checking their pulse or counting the minutes. You watch a group of men sitting on a low stone wall, talking in low melodic tones about the upcoming rains. The conversation drifts like smoke, with no clear beginning or end. It is the kind of talk that only happens when you aren't worried about optimizing your time. You feel the stillness of the afternoon settling over you. The only sound is the occasional cluck of a chicken and the soft rustle of the wind through the coffee leaves. You realize that by bringing these trees into their yards, the Ethiopians weren't just securing a supply of berries. They were creating a new kind of social space. The backyard coffee patch was the ancestor of every neighborhood cafe in existence. As you sit there, the scent of damp earth and green growing things fills your lungs, and you feel a profound sense of ease. There is something deeply comforting about the idea of a plant that requires you to wait, to stay still, and to watch the seasons change. You aren't just a visitor in this village. You are a participant in a 3-century-long slow-motion dance between humans and a very special shrub. You leave the shade of the garden and wander toward the sound of a rhythmic, scraping noise coming from a small workshop near the village center. Inside, you find a potter, her hands covered in the rich, slate-colored clay of the riverbank. She is beginning to shape something that will become the most essential tool in the history of Ethiopian coffee, the jabina. You watch as she pinches and smooths the wet earth, her movements so fluid they seem to be a form of meditation. There is no pottery wheel here. She is using the coil method, building the vessel layer by layer with a patience that makes your modern sense of time feel slightly ridiculous. The jabina is a masterpiece of functional art. You see the bulbous bottom designed to sit perfectly in a bed of hot coals, and the long, elegant neck that helps trap the steam and concentrate the aroma. Through gestures and a few quiet words, that the clay must be thick enough to hold heat for hours, but porous enough to breathe. As you watch her work, you realize that the shape of this pot hasn't changed significantly in centuries. It is a design perfected by trial, error, and 1,000 morning brews. You reach out to touch a finished, unbaked pot, feeling the cool, damp texture of the earth that will soon hold the fire-transformed essence of the coffee beans. Historians still debate this issue today. Some believe the distinct long neck design was influenced by ancient trade vessels from the Nile Valley, while others insist it is a purely indigenous invention born out of the specific needs of the Ethiopian highlands. Regardless of its ancestry, the jabina you see being born today is the heart of the household. It is just a kettle. It is a living thing. Once it is fired in an open pit, it will be seasoned with coffee and oil, a process that bonds the flavor of the beans to the walls of the pot forever. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. A traditional jibina usually has no filter at the spout. The potter creates a small straw plug or uses a wisp of horsehair to catch the grounds as the coffee is poured. It's a low-tech solution that works perfectly, provided you have the steady hand and the slow pace of a person who isn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. You watch the potter set the newly shaped vessel aside to dry in the afternoon sun, a process that will take days. You realize that, in this world, if you want a cup of coffee, you first have to wait for the earth to dry and the fire to burn. The air in the workshop is cool and smells like damp soil and old ash. You sit on a low wooden bench and watch the dust motes dance in a single beam of light that cuts through the thatched roof. There is no clatter of machinery, no hum of electricity. Just the soft shuck sound of the potter smoothing the clay with a piece of gourd. It's a sound that seems to slow your heart rate. You find yourself focusing on the curves of the pot, marveling at how something so simple can become the centerpiece of an entire culture's social life. By the time the sun begins to set, casting an orange glow over the workshop, the potter has finished 3 new vessels. They sit in a row, like silent sentinels waiting for their turn in the fire. You feel a deep sense of respect for this slow craftsmanship. In a world that would eventually invent instant coffee in plastic pods, this clay pot represents a refusal to rush. It demands a fire, a ritual, and a community. The cooling air carries the scent of the evening's first fires, and you know that somewhere nearby, a jibina is already being nestled into the coals, beginning the long, slow process of bringing people together. You are invited to step inside a traditional Ethiopian home, where the floor is covered in freshly cut long grass, creating a lush, green carpet that smells of the earth after a heavy rain. This is just a quick caffeine stop. You have just walked into the coffee ceremony, a ritual that serves as the heartbeat of communal life. You take your seat on a low wooden stool, feeling the cool grass beneath your feet. In the center of the room, a woman, the host, begins a process that will take at least an hour. She is dressed in a traditional white cotton dress with colorful embroidered borders, and her movements are as rhythmic and purposeful as a priestess performing an ancient rite. The ceremony is built around 3 distinct rounds of coffee, known as abol, tona, and baraka. As you watch the first pot brew, you realize that the name of each round carries a specific weight. Abol is the first and strongest, meant for the initial awakening of the senses and the serious discussion of the day. Snooze, you watch the dark liquid pour from the jibina in a long, steady stream into tiny porcelain cups. There is a specific grace to the way the stream never breaks, a skill that takes years to master. You take your first cup, the abol, and the intensity of the flavor is enough to make your eyes widen. It's thick, dark, and carries the spirit of the highlands in every drop. Historians still debate this issue today. Some believe these 3 rounds were originally designed to represent the stages of a spiritual journey, while others argue they were simply a practical way to get the most out of expensive, hand-processed beans. Regardless of the scholarly theories, for you, sitting here, the 3 rounds represent something much simpler: the gift of time. By the time you reach the second round, tona, the coffee is slightly weaker as more water is added to the grounds. But the conversation in the room has grown warmer. People are no longer just sharing news, they are sharing stories, jokes, and local gossip. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. It is considered incredibly rude to leave the ceremony before the 3rd round is finished. The 3rd cup, the baraka, literally means to be blessed. It is the weakest of the brews, but it is considered the most important because it seals the social bond between the host and the guests. You find yourself leaning back against the wall. The initial kick of the abol having settled into a comfortable, steady glow, you realize that in this culture, rushing through a cup of coffee would be like trying to speed. Read a poem. You get the words, but you miss the soul. The air in the room is now thick with the scent of the coffee and the light snacks being passed around, usually toasted barley or popcorn. You watch the steam rise from the jibina, which is resting on its side on a woven straw ring between pores. The light in the room is dim, filtered through the doorway, and the world outside feels like a distant memory. There are no clocks on the walls, and nobody is checking their phone. Partly because you in the 17th century, but mostly because the ceremony itself dictates the pace of the afternoon. As you sip the final Baraka cup, you feel a profound sense of peace. The ritual has done its job. You aren't just caffeinated, you are connected. You listen to the history of the village, the hopes for the next harvest, and the quiet laughter of neighbors. The journey of the coffee bean, from the forest to the clay pot to this tiny cup, has finally reached its destination in your hands. You breathe in the lingering aroma, feeling the weight of the day lift from your shoulders. This is the art of the 3-century-old brew. It teaches you that the best things in life cannot be hurried. They must be poured, shared, and savored, one round at a time. As you sit in the green-carpeted room, waiting for the jibina to work its magic on the second round, you notice your host reaching for a small, ornate clay burner. She places a few charcoal embers inside and then sprinkles a handful of crystalline resin onto the heat. Instantly, a thick white plume of smoke spirals upward. This is frankincense. In the world of Ethiopian coffee, the smell of the bean and the smell of the resin are inseparable partners. You watch the smoke curl and twist, dancing in the shafts of afternoon light like a living ghost. It doesn't just fill the room, it fills your lungs, carrying a scent that is citrusy, woody, and ancient. This is the philosophy of waiting. In our modern world, waiting is a nuisance, a glitch in the system. But here, in the 18th century, waiting is an active ingredient. You aren't just sitting there. You are being prepared. The frankincense acts as a sensory bridge, clearing the air of the day, as mundane smells and focusing your mind on the ritual at hand. You find your breathing slowing down, matching the rhythmic rise of the smoke. It's a deliberate deceleration. You realize that you can have the coffee until the incense has done its work, and you can have the conversation until the incense has softened the room. Historians still debate this issue today. Some suggest that the use of frankincense in coffee ceremonies was a way to mask the smells of livestock or cooking, while others argue it was a direct carry over from religious liturgies intended to sanctify the social gathering. Whatever the reason, you feel the physical effect of it. Your shoulders drop an inch. The tension you didn't know you were holding in your neck begins to dissolve. The incense creates a sacred space out of an ordinary living room. It turns a simple act of drinking into a moment of transcendence. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. Frankincense was once so valuable that it was traded pound for pound with gold. In this village, having high-quality resin to burn with your coffee is a subtle sign of hospitality and respect for your guests. You watch the host move the burner around the room, ensuring that every person is enveloped in the fragrant mist. It's a way of saying, you are welcome here, and your presence is worth the finest things we have. Even the children sitting quietly by the door seem to fall under the spell of the smoke, their eyes following the white trails as they dissipate near the ceiling. You lean back, feeling the rough texture of the mud-plastered wall through your shirt. The heat from the charcoal burner adds a gentle warmth to the air, making the room feel cozy and protected from the outside world. There is a specific quietness that comes with the burning of incense, a heavy silence that feels full rather than empty. You watch the host stir the coals, the orange glow reflecting in her eyes. There is no rush to speak. The smoke provides the entertainment, and the anticipation of the next cup provides the purpose. As the frankincense begins to burn low, leaving behind a faint, sweet after scent, you realize that you've been sitting here for 20 minutes without checking the time or feeling the urge to move. The ritual has effectively rewired your internal clock. You are now operating on coffee time, where the only deadlines are the boiling of the water and the settling of the grounds. You breathe in deeply, one last time, taking in the mixture of wood smoke, coffee, and resin. You feel a profound sense of clarity, as if the smoke has cleared away the clutter of your thoughts, leaving only the present moment and the warmth of the community around you. You are standing on the edge of a jagged cliff, the salty spray of the Red Sea stinging your eyes. The year is somewhere in the mid-15th century, and the world is about to change forever because of what's hidden in the tattered leather pouches of the traders you are following. For centuries, Ethiopia has been the jealous guardian of its magic berries. There are rumors that the authorities would rather see a man lose his hand than see a fertile coffee seed leave the country. But ideas, like the smell of a good roast, are impossible to contain. You watch as a group of merchants, their silhouettes sharp against the rising moon, prepare to board a small wooden dhow, a traditional sailing vessel that looks far too fragile for the dark, churning waters ahead. You scramble onto the deck, the wood creaking like an old man's joints under your feet. The mission is simple but perilous. Smuggle fertile coffee seeds across the water to the port of Mocha in Yemen. Up until this point, Ethiopia mostly exported beans that had been boiled or parched, effectively killing the seed so it couldn't be planted elsewhere. You are carrying the real thing. You find a quiet corner among the sacks of spices and hides, watching the lights of the African coast fade into a thin, shimmering line. The air is thick with the smell of brine and the unwashed wool of the sailors. Historians still debate this issue today. Did the coffee seeds travel with Sufi monks who used them for spiritual visions? Or were they stolen by ambitious merchants looking to break the Ethiopian monopoly? Some even suggest that a legendary figure named Baba Budan would later smuggle 7 seeds by taping them to his belly. As you feel the rhythmic sway of the boat, you realize you are part of an early act of industrial espionage. If you are caught, the consequences would be a mere fine. You'd be lucky to see the sunrise. Yet, the atmosphere on the boat is surprisingly calm. The sailors hum low tunes, and the splash of the oars against the waves provides a hypnotic, repetitive soundtrack to your escape. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. The port of Mocha, your destination, became so famous for its coffee exports that for centuries, the word mocha was simply synonymous with high-quality coffee. It had nothing to do with chocolate back then. It was just the name of a dusty, bustling port town, where the world's first global commodity market was taking shape. You watch as the captain checks the stars, his movements slow and certain. There is no GPS, no radar, just the ancient wisdom of the sky and a desperate hope that the seeds in the whole Don tea get damp. As the how cuts through the dark water, you find yourself staring at the moon's reflection. The coffee in your pouch represents more than just a drink. It represents the beginning of the end of Ethiopia's isolation. Once these seeds hit the soil in Yemen, the black gold will begin its march toward Istanbul, Venice, and eventually every corner of the planet. But here, in the middle of the sea, everything is still. The wind dies down for a moment, and the boat glides in a silence so profound you can hear the heartbeat of the person sitting next to you. It's a moment of suspended animation, a pause in the grand narrative of history. You feel the cool night air on your face and the slight vibration of the hull. There is no rush to reach the shore. The sea has its own pace, and tonight, it has decided to be gentle. You realize that while the world might eventually turn coffee into a fast-paced, high-pressure business, its journey into that world was slow, quiet, and carried on the backs of people who knew how to wait for the right wind. You close your eyes, letting the rhythmic slap of the waves lull you into a state of deep relaxation. The seeds are safe, the stars are bright, and the future is brewing just over the horizon. You are no longer on a creaking boat or a dusty hillside. You find yourself walking across the polished stone floors of a royal reception hall in the heart of the Ethiopian Empire. The year is in the late 19th century, during the reign of Emperor Menelik II. The air here doesn't just smell of coffee. It smells of beeswax, expensive spices, and the heavy weight of authority. You are a guest at a royal feast, and as you look around, you see foreign diplomats from Europe and the Middle East sitting on ornate rugs, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and intimidation. They aren't just here to talk about borders and treaties. They are here to witness the grandeur of the Ethiopian court. And at the center of that grandeur is the coffee ceremony. You watch as servants in pristine white robes bring out a jabina that is larger and more decorated than any you've seen in the villages. It is etched with silver and gold, glowing in the flickering light of 100 beeswax candles. The emperor himself sits on a raised dais, watching the proceedings with a calm, stoic gaze. You realize that for the Ethiopian monarchy, coffee was the ultimate diplomatic tool. It was a way to say to the outside world, we have a culture that is ancient, sophisticated, and entirely our own. You see a French diplomat struggle to maintain his composure as the intense aroma of the first pour hits him. He is used to the watered-down café au lait of Paris. He is not prepared for the black gold of the Abyssinian highlands. Historians still debate this issue today. Some suggest that Emperor Menelik II used these elaborate coffee ceremonies specifically to stall for time during difficult negotiations, forcing European envoys to sit through hours of ritual before they could even mention a treaty. Others argue it was simply the standard level of hospitality for a king of his stature. As you sit there, sipping from a delicate cup that feels as thin as an eggshell, you can feel the strategic slowness of the room. Every crackle of the incense is a reminder that in this palace, time belongs to the emperor, not the clock-watching visitors from the West. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. Emperor Menelik II was so fond of modern technology that he was one of the first people in Africa to own a telephone and a car. Yet he refused to let anyone touch the traditional coffee ceremony. He understood that while machines could bring speed, only the jabina could bring soul. You watch as he gestures for a second round to be poured for a particularly flustered Italian envoy. It's a move of pure power. A caffeinated checkmate. You can almost see the tension leaving the envoy shoulders as the warmth of the coffee begins to work its magic. Even in the high-stakes world of 19th century imperialism, a well-brewed cup has the power to turn enemies into weary, comfortable companions. And the echoes of the servants' footsteps are soft and muffled by the heavy tapestries. You find yourself leaning back, the richness of the coffee coating your tongue. There is a sense of immense safety here, within these thick stone walls outside. The world is changing rapidly. Railroads are being built, empires are rising and falling. But inside this hall, the ritual remains an anchor. You watch the steam rise toward the high vaulted ceiling, where it vanishes into the shadows. The pace is regal, deliberate, and entirely unhurried. As the ceremony reaches its third round, the baraka, you notice that the diplomats have finally stopped checking their pocket watches. They have surrendered to the rhythm of the palace. You feel a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that this little red berry, which started with a dancing goat on a lonely mountain, is now presiding over the fate of nations. You breathe in the scent of the royal roast, feeling the steady, calm pulse of a kingdom that knows exactly who it is. There is no rush to leave. In the presence of the emperor and his coffee, the only thing that matters is the present moment and the slow, dark liquid that binds everyone in the room together in a shared, silent respect. You step away from the opulence of the royal palace and find yourself back in a sun-drenched courtyard of a humble family home. The year is timeless, as the scene before you hasn't changed in 3 centuries. You are sitting on a low stool, watching a young woman prepare the beans for the morning brew. This is the symphony of the mortar. In our modern world, we have electric grinders that scream like jet engines for 5 seconds to pulverize a handful of beans. But here, the process is a slow, rhythmic percussion. You watch as she places the freshly roasted, still, warm beans into a mokacha, a heavy, hollowed-out wooden mortar. She picks up the zenazina, a long-weighted wooden or metal pestle, and begins the strike. Thump, swish, thump, swish. It's a hypnotic sound, a heartbeat that echoes off the mud brick walls. You find your own head nodding in time with the beat. It isn't just about breaking the beans. It's about releasing the oils at a temperature that only human effort can regulate. You reach out and touch the side of the wooden mortar, feeling the slight vibration of each strike. The air is suddenly flooded with a new layer of fragrance. The inner smell of the coffee, which is more intense and raw than the aroma of the roast itself. Historians still debate this issue today. Some claim that the specific rhythm of the coffee grinding was used in certain villages as a secret language or a signal to neighbors that a gathering was about to begin. Others insist it simply the most efficient way to achieve a uniform grind without modern machinery. As you watch the beans turn from brittle dark pebbles into a coarse, oily powder, you realize that this labor is actually a form of relaxation. The woman is checking a timer or a grind size gauge. She is listening. She knows the beans are ready when the sound of the thump changes from a sharp crack to a muffled thud. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. In many Ethiopian households, the task of grinding the coffee is considered an honor, and the rhythmic sound is said to keep low, energy spirits away from the home. You watch a tabby cat stretched out in a patch of sunlight just a few feet away. The cat doesn't flinch at the sound of the pounding. In fact, it seems to be purring in sync with the pestle. It's a reminder that noise doesn't have to be intrusive. When it has a natural rhythm, it becomes a part of the silence, a layer of comfort that tells your brain everything is exactly as it should be. You take a turn with the pestle, and you quickly realize it is much heavier than it looks. Your modern muscles, used to clicking mice and scrolling screens, protest at the weight. But after a few minutes, you stop fighting the weight and start using the momentum. Thump, swish. You feel a strange sense of accomplishment. You aren't just making a drink. You are participating in the physical history of the bean. You are the bridge between the earth and the cup. The sweat on your brow feels like a small price to pay for the deep, earthy perfume rising from the mortar. As the grinding finishes, the woman takes a small brush made of dry grass and carefully sweeps every last grain of the precious powder into a small bowl. Nothing is wasted. The courtyard is now quiet again, but the rhythm of the grinding stays with you, a phantom beat in your chest. You realize that by the time you actually get to drink this coffee, you will have seen it, smelled it, and even heard it. It is a multi-sensory journey that makes the final sip 1,000 times more rewarding. You lean back, the sun warming your skin, and feel a deep, heavy tiredness. The good kind of tired that comes from a slow, meaningful task. You are sitting in a small, lively home in the Harar region, and the coffee ceremony is reaching its climax. But as you look at the tiny cups being prepared, you notice something that might make a modern barista faint. Your host isn't reaching for an oat milk carton or a jar of caramel syrup. She is holding a small bowl of coarse sea salt and a generous slab of spiced clarified butter, known as niter kibe. You watch slightly mesmerized and perhaps a little worried as a dollop of this yellow, aromatic fat is dropped into your steaming cup of dark brew. This is the great additive debate. For centuries, while the Western world was busy arguing over milk and sugar, the people of the Ethiopian highlands were experimenting with much more savory profiles. You take a tentative sip. The first thing you notice isn't the bitterness, but a rich, velvety mouthfeel. The salt acts as a bridge, cutting the acidity and bringing out a hidden chocolatey sweetness in the beans you hadn't noticed before. It's a heavy, nourishing drink, more like a liquid meal than a quick morning beverage. You find yourself surprisingly comforted by the warmth of the butter as it coats your throat. Historians still debate this issue today. Some believe the addition of salt and butter was a practical necessity for nomadic tribes who needed the electrolytes and fats to survive the harsh climate, while others argue it has deep roots in ancient medicinal practices, where coffee was viewed as a carrier for healing herbs and fats. As you sit there, feeling the savory steam rise into your nostrils, you realize that the purity of black coffee is a relatively modern Western obsession. In this room, in this century, coffee is a canvas for whatever the body needs. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. In some southern parts of Ethiopia, it's not uncommon to find a stray clove of garlic or even a pinch of rue, a bitter herb, floating in the cup. Some locals swear that a garlic coffee is the only true cure for a persistent winter cold. You watch a guest across from you savoring his salted brew with a look of pure contentment, and you realize that taste is entirely a matter of geography and tradition. What sounds weird to one person is home to another. The room is filled with the low hum of conversation, and the savory scent of the butter blends with the ever-present aroma of roasting beans. You feel a sense of adventurous relaxation. You aren't just drinking history. You are tasting the resourcefulness of a people who used every ingredient at their disposal to enhance their most precious ritual. The pace of the afternoon remains slow and syrupy, much like the butter melting in your cup. You find yourself leaning into the experience, letting go of your preconceived notions of what coffee should be. As you finish the cup, leaving a slight shimmer of oil on the ceramic rim, you feel a profound sense of fullness. The savory additives have grounded the caffeine's energy, turning that potential jitter into a steady, warm glow that radiates from your chest to your fingertips. You realize that the history of coffee is also a history of human creativity and the endless search for comfort. You close your eyes for a second, enjoying the lingering taste of spice and earth, feeling perfectly balanced in a world that isn't afraid to be a little bit salty. You are wandering through the narrow, winding alleys of an 18th century Ethiopian trade town. The sun is beginning to set, painting the mud brick walls in shades of deep ochre and gold. You follow a sound, not the rhythmic pounding of a mortar this time, but the low melodic hum of a dozen voices overlapping in a single room. You pull back a heavy fabric curtain and step into a coffee house. This is a modern, sterile shop with minimalist furniture and Wi-Fi passwords. This is a dim, warm space where the floor is covered in thick layers of dried grass, and the air is so heavy with the scent of roasting beans and wood smoke that you can almost feel it on your skin. You find a spot to sit on a low sheepskin-covered bench. Around you, people are leaning in close to one another, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of a central hearth. This is the original social media. Long before the first printing press reached these highlands, or a single digital notification was sent, these rooms were the servers, where information was processed. You listen to the flow of conversation. It moves slowly, like thick honey. A merchant discusses the price of salt in the north. An elder recounts a story from a decade ago. A traveler shares news of a new bridge being built 2 valleys away. You realize that in this setting, coffee is the lubricant for the gears of society. Historians still debate this issue today. Some argue that these early coffee houses were primarily religious spaces where Sufi mystics gathered for communal chanting, while others believe they were purely secular hubs for political dissent and community organizing. As you watch a group of men nodding in agreement over a steaming jibina, it's clear that the truth is likely a messy, beautiful mix of both. The coffee house provided a neutral ground where the strict hierarchies of the outside world seemed to soften. Here, as long as you have a cup in your hand, you have the right to listen and the right to be heard. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. In many of these traditional spaces, it was considered a major social faux pas to talk about heavy or dark subjects. During the first cup of coffee, the first round, the A-bowl, was for pleasantries, blessings, and light news. It was only by the second or third cup that the conversation was allowed to drift into more serious or contentious territory. You watch as a newcomer enters, greeting everyone with a slow, deliberate handshake before taking his place in the circle. No one is rushing him to get to the point. The point is the presence. You lean your head back against the cool wall and let the voices wash over you. You don't need to understand every word of the local dialect to feel the sense of belonging. The laughter is infectious, the silences are comfortable, and the constant gentle clinking of porcelain cups against saucers creates a soothing, domestic soundtrack. There is something profoundly relaxing about being in a place where the primary goal is simply to be. You realize that the fast-paced, grab-and-go coffee culture of the future is actually a loss of this fundamental human connection. As the evening deepens and the fire in the hearth settles into glowing embers, you feel a deep sense of stillness. The coffee has kept your mind alert, but the environment has kept your body at peace. You are an anonymous observer in a ritual that has repeated itself every night for hundreds of years. You breathe in the lingering scent of the charcoal and the beans, feeling the weight of the day as journey dissolve into the communal hum. You aren't just a traveler in a foreign land. You are a guest in a timeless living room, where the only thing on the schedule is the next pour and the next story. You find yourself standing on a dusty ridge, squinting against the harsh midday sun of the late 19th century. Beside you is a Victorian gentleman, dressed in a tweed suit that is entirely too heavy for the Ethiopian climate, his pith helmet slightly askew. He is a British explorer, an amateur botanist, and a man who believes that proper coffee should be served in a silver pot with a side of cold milk and a silver spoon. You watch as he is invited into a local chieftain's tent. The air inside is cool, but thick with the scent of the clay jibina and the roasting beans. As the first cup of abal is poured for him, you see his eyes widen. To him, this isn't tea coffee, it's an intense, unfiltered ink that seems to hum with its own dark energy. He takes a sip, and his face undergoes a series of rapid, involuntary contortions. It's too strong, too bitter, and worst of all for his Victorian sensibilities. It's served at a temperature that could melt lead. You find yourself suppressed a chuckle as he tries to maintain his British, stiff upper lip, while his taste buds are experiencing a revolutionary uprising. This is the moment where two worlds collide, the ancient, ritualistic cradle of coffee, meeting the industrial, fast-moving West. You watch as he meticulously records the experience in his leather-bound journal, describing the brew as a potent, primitive broth, that seems to grant the local populace a most extraordinary stamina. Some argue that these European accounts were intentionally exaggerated to paint the Africans as exotic or other, while others believe the explorers were genuinely physically overwhelmed by the sheer potency of the original, undiluted Ethiopian beans. As you sit there, watching the explorer gingerly set his cup down, you realize that he is missing the most important part. He's so focused on the flavor profile and the lack of etiquette that he doesn't notice the profound piece of the tent. He doesn't see that the coffee isn't the point. The connection is. He is an outsider looking through a keyhole, while you are inside, feeling the slow, steady pulse of the room. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. Some Victorian travelers were so convinced that the black brew of Ethiopia was a different species of plant altogether that they tried to bring back samples of the soil, thinking the secret lay in the dirt rather than the thousands of years of cultural practice. You watch as the explorer tries to explain the concept of a London coffee house to the chieftain. The chieftain listens with a polite, puzzled expression, wondering why anyone would want to drink their coffee in a crowded, noisy building with strangers and then leave within 15 minutes. To the host, that sounds less like a luxury and more like a punishment. You lean back, feeling the dry breeze rustle the fabric of the tent. The contrast between the two men is striking. One is obsessed with progress, categorization, and proper methods. The other is rooted in tradition, hospitality, and the slow passage of time. You realize that you have a foot in both worlds. You understand the explorer's shock, but you have stayed long enough to feel the chieftain's calm. The coffee has become a bridge that neither man quite knows how to cross yet. It's a moment of historical friction, but it's softened by the warmth of the brew and the inevitable drowsiness that follows a heavy midday ritual. As the explorer prepares to leave, clutching his notes and his slightly burnt tongue, you stay behind for one more cup. The tent is quiet again. The sun begins to sink, and the long shadows of the acacia trees stretch across the valley. You feel a sense of relief that you aren't in a rush to categorize everything. You are just a traveler in time, enjoying the fact that some things, like the bitterness of a bean and the warmth of a fire, don't need to be explained or improved by a man in a tweed suit. You breathe in the cooling air, feeling the history of the world settle around you like a heavy, comfortable blanket. You are trekking deep into the heart of the Benchmachi zone, far beyond the reach of any paved road or royal palace. The year feels irrelevant here, because the forest you are walking through hasn't changed its character in 10,000 years. The canopy above is so dense that the sunlight only reaches the forest floor in thin, emerald needles of light. You are on a pilgrimage to find the mother tree. While the world knows coffee as a commodity in a bag, you are looking for it in its wild, ancestral state. You push aside a heavy, lichen-covered branch, and there she is, a wild Coffea arabica tree, taller and more spindly than the domesticated versions you saw in the village gardens. This tree is a living library of genetic information. You reach out and touch the bark, which is rougher than you expected. This is the genetic Eve, from which billions of trees across South America, Asia, and the rest of Africa descended. There is a profound silence in this part of the woods, a stillness that feels heavy with the weight of time. You realize that while humans have spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of the brew, this tree has been quietly existing, perfectly adapted to the rain and the shade, long before we ever thought to pick its fruit. You pick a single wild berry. It is smaller, more intense, a concentrated spark of life. Historians and biologists still debate this issue today. Some believe that these wild forests in Ethiopia are the only place on Earth where coffee is truly indigenous. while others argue that ancient tectonic shifts and animal migrations might have spread the plant much further than we realize. But standing here, in the damp heat of the undergrowth, the academic arguments fade away. You feel a sense of reverence. This tree doesn't care about the price of a latte in New York or the ritual of a king. It just grows. It is the raw, unedited version of the story we've been telling for 13 chapters. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. Some local forest-dwelling communities still believe that these wild coffee trees are protected by ancient spirits, and they will only harvest the berries after asking the forest for permission. You watch a colorful Turako bird land on a high branch, its bright feathers a stark contrast to the deep greens of the leaves. The bird eats a berry and flies away, unwittingly continuing the cycle of dispersal that has kept this forest alive for eons. You realize that coffee's invention by humans was really just us joining in on a process that nature had already mastered. You find a mossy log to sit on and simply breathe. The air is so oxygen-rich it almost feels sweet. You are miles away from the nearest Jabina, but the spirit of coffee is more present here than anywhere else. There is no rush to find the path back. You are at the source. You listen to the drip of condensation from the high leaves and the distant, muffled sound of a waterfall. It's a sonic landscape that encourages a complete surrender to the moment. You feel your pulse slowing down to match the ancient rhythm of the forest. By the time you stand up to leave, the light has shifted to a deep golden green. You leave the wild tree as you found it, undisturbed, quiet, and magnificent. You realize that the 3-century journey of Ethiopian coffee isn't just a story of human culture. It's a story of a plant that allowed us to come along for the ride. As you walk back toward the edge of the trees, you feel a renewed sense of respect for every cup you will ever drink. You've seen the beginning, the raw truth behind the ritual, and it is more peaceful and beautiful than you ever imagined. You are back where you started, but everything feels different. You are sitting on a shaded porch overlooking the vast, rolling hills of the Kaffa region. The sun is a giant, glowing amber orb hanging just above the horizon, casting a warmth that feels like a physical touch. Before you sits a small, simple cup of coffee, the third and final pour, the baraka. This is the cup of blessing, and as you hold it between your palms, you realize that your journey through 3 centuries of history has led you to this exact moment of absolute stillness. The steam rises in a straight, lazy line, disappearing into the golden light of the evening. You reflect on everything you've seen. You've run with the dancing goats, watched the smoke rise in ancient monasteries, trekked with Oromo warriors, and sat at the feet of emperors. You've heard the rhythmic thump of the mortar and tasted the strange, comforting salt and butter of the highlands. All of these moments are contained within this one small cup. Historians still debate this issue today. Will the traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony survive the onslaught of the modern, high-speed world? But as you look around at the families in the village below, gathering for their own evening rituals, you realize that some things are too deeply rooted in the soul of a people to ever truly vanish. This isn't just a commodity. It is a way of breathing. Here is a quirky bit of trivia for you. In many Ethiopian traditions, the word for coffee, buna, is often used interchangeably with the word for peace or togetherness, and it is lighter than the others, gentle and smooth. It doesn't jolt your system, it settles it. You feel a heavy, pleasant tiredness in your limbs, the kind that comes from a day well spent and a mind well traveled. The world outside may be obsessed with efficiency and productivity, but here, the only requirement is that you finish your cup and appreciate the person sitting next to you. The sky is turning a deep violet now, and the first few stars are beginning to blink into existence. The sounds of the day, the distant calls of livestock, the laughter of children, the rustle of the wind are softening into a quiet, nocturnal hum. You find yourself leaning back, closing your eyes, and letting the lingering taste of earth and jasmine rest on your tongue. You have followed the bean from the wild forest to the global stage, and yet, the most powerful version of the story is this one. A quiet moment, a warm cup, and the slow passage of time. You realize that you don't need to rush toward tomorrow. The 300 years of history you've witnessed have taught you that the most important things happen slowly, through ritual and patience. You breathe in the cooling night air, which still carries the faint, ghostly scent of frankincense and roasted seeds. You feel completely anchored, completely at peace. The journey is over, and the blessing of the baraka is complete. And so, as the fire in the hearth fades to a soft orange glow and the world around you sinks into a deep, respectful silence, you find yourself drifting off. Your thoughts are as calm as the settling grounds at the bottom of a jabina. The history of coffee is now a part of your own history, a warm memory that will stay with you long after the cup is empty. You are safe, you are tired in the best possible way, and you are exactly where you need to be. Good night, and may your dreams be as rich and deep as the highlands themselves.